My name's Victor. I'm an addict. I'm a compulsive eater. A way to measure 3 meals a day off the gray sheet or write them down, commit them to my sponsor. A way to measure without exception. Abstinence is the most important thing in my life. My abstinence date is April 18th of 2001, and for that, I'm truly grateful. I forgot what meeting I was in. I also am a member of Narcotics Anonymous, and of course, right when I start talking, the dog wonderfully drinking the water. Okay, he's done. They say to tell what it was like, what happened, and what it's like today. And so for me, food has always been, something that I turned to when I wasn't feeling in the right place. Meaning I was not, even though I didn't know what it was talking about back then, I think it was being spiritually fit. I would have never known what that term meant. It was being honest, open-minded, and willing, and not being afraid. And so, I turned to food along really early. And I was looking at pictures. We got a bunch of pictures from my brother that my mom had, like boxes of them, and we were scanning them. And when I was probably, from like young kid to about third or fourth grade, it wasn't too bad. I was a pretty skinny kid, but like in fourth grade, you see that all of a sudden I blew up. And from that point, it was always up and down, up and down. But I remember purposely turning to food to turn off what's inside. And I think it was all those carbs and everything. They were like a drug. It turned off all that craziness in my head, that fear, that insecurity, that self-centered fear, trying to control my life. That was everything was about control, trying to control my life, trying to control everything around me. And it was up and down from there. Junior high, I started wrestling, and I learned some really unhealthy ways to lose weight, like wearing trash bags and then skipping rope with like sweatshirts on and trash bags, and to lose weight, and then starving myself too to lose weight. And then day of the match, you wake and you want to make weight, but then you want to gain as much as you can before the match. So you just start chowing down on stuff before the match, so you're heavier than your opponent. So yeah, it's some craziness. I hope they don't do that with the kids in high school these days. But school sucked. I hated school. I think it was just horrible. It was the most horrible experience I've ever been through. I'm traumatized for life from going to school. I was always made fun of. Even when I was on the wrestling team and I was a good wrestler, I still got made fun of because I was poor. I didn't have the right clothes. I didn't talk the right way. I didn't listen to the right music. I didn't go to the dances. And if I did, I wore my band rock and roll shirts, and not the preppy stuff. And we moved from Wisconsin down to Texas here in Austin when I was 14. And the town I was in, Waukesha, it was a fairly small town, relatively speaking. We moved down here to Austin, which in Texas sense, we got two big, fairly big cities. We got 3 or 4 big cities that are bigger than Austin. Well, yeah, there's a lot of them that are bigger than Austin, but it's still a big city. And so with my first time at school, I knew that this was not going to be good. I saw somebody get stabbed like in the middle of when we were going to class, and I was just like, okay, this is Austin. And I, through that whole time, I was that was the only thing I had. That was the only friend I had, was food. That was my comfort. That was what kept me going. And eventually I got into the wonderful world of pharmaceutical drugs, or not so pharmaceutical. The first time I got high, it shut all that down too. And I was like, well, I can do this. I still, like, for a long time continued to eat, even with the drugs. I was like, I drank, do drugs. And then while I was high, I would be like, okay, now I had a ritual, I had all my ritual, getting all my thing together, I'd go down to this one store and get this big thing, and I'd set it down, and I'd have my Diet Coke, because I was watching my weight, and I'd have that there. And it was just like a ritual the whole time. And eventually I dropped out of high school, and I just hung out at home and ate constantly. And then eventually my dad was like, you need to find a job. And so I got a job where my mom worked, washing dishes. And so I was a dishwasher, and I was big too. So I had, the uniform didn't fit me. And my manager, she told me, her name was Betty. I'll remember her for the rest of my life. She goes, geez, Victor, you need a bra. And I was just like, oh, okay. And so we lived outside of town. I don't know if, some of you have been into Austin for the roundup and stuff, but when we were here, the airport now it's probably about 15 miles outside of the center of Austin. And so I used to live out there, and the only way to get into town, there's a highway out there. The only way to get into town was to ride a bike. So I started riding my bike into town, and on the highway, I'm all, and eventually I started losing weight. Like, I was standing in the shower one day, and I'm feeling like I was washing my legs, and I felt my legs, and my legs weren't rubbing together. And I was just like, wait a second, what have I been doing differently? Well, I've been riding my bike. So from that point on, I rode constantly. It was like exercise bulimia for sure. Rain or shine, 110-degree weather or below freezing, I would ride. I'd ride probably anywhere between 60 to 100 miles a day, all over Austin. That's all I did. I'd ride before I went to work. Then I'd ride to work. And then after work, I'd ride around again. And especially after I ate a lot, when I binged, I definitely would just ride constantly. So I was not only using a lot of drugs, but I was also eating a lot, but then I was exercising my butt off. And then I got down to a normal weight. My cousin just sent me some pictures that I didn't even know that were taken. And it was during that whole time. And I was I think I was probably a normal weight, maybe a little under, maybe. But I'm looking at him, I'm like, I got a mullet and everything. I was like white trash to the core on that one. I was like, wow, I was like I must have been really working out a lot. And then eventually, we got married. I met her at the tattoo shop. I started getting tattooed. I met her at the tattoo shop. I knew instantly. I saw her picture in the portfolio, the guy's portfolio, and she had a mohawk and she had the side of her head shaved and tattoo. And I was just like, she is cool. And I thought she was too cool for me. So we knew each other. And so she used to come into the restaurant I was going to, that I cooked at in NA, and they'd come to the fellowship at the restaurant I worked at. And so she came and I said, hey, do you want me to make you something to eat? And she goes, well, no, I do this thing called Grey Sheet. And she had the Grey Sheet glow for sure. And she told me about it, and I was just like, okay. And so I went back out, and I was still using them too. So when they talked about all these quote Narcotics Anonymous fellowship, and they go, there's addicts in here, I was just like, what are they proud of being addicts? It's like narcotics, yay, we're a fellowship and we love drugs. I didn't even know anything about what that meant. And so eventually we started going out. And by that time, she had stopped doing Grey Sheet. And I found an eating buddy. And it was like fast forward up 2001. I mean, there's not much else in between that. It was just like all we did was eat. We try to get abstinent and we talk each other out of it. And for me, it's all about step one at that point. Step one is being able to admit complete and utter defeat. And until I get that point, I am not going to get abstinent. I have to completely smash that idea that I can eat like a normal person, and that in somehow, some way, I can control my life in that. If I can control my food, I can control my life. There was not a point in my life where I could say, I'm going to take a bite and I'm going to stop at that bite. I didn't know when I was going to stop. When I took that first bite, I didn't know. Just like all the other substances I'm addicted to. When I took that first, I couldn't just say I'm going to have one. It used to baffle me how people used to do that. Baffle me. I used to make these things because I was a chef. Talk about it. I was like a drug dealer. So I would make these things and people would say, oh, it's so rich. And I was just like, what? So fast forward to 2001. And I think the only thing that people ask me, what got you abstinent? I think it was like that moment of clarity of being completely and utterly defeated by the food. I had high triglycerides. I was overweight. My liver enzymes were through the roof. I'd been clean for God knows how long before. So my liver was just getting destroyed from the food, and because my body was a still. And so eventually I started going to meetings. And Austin, there was a person who brought Grey Sheet to Austin, was from Cambridge. She came down, brought it up to Austin. She kind of twisted off and started doing her own thing. So the fellowship, when I first got here, I thought everybody, when I went to the Grey Sheet meeting, I thought everybody at the meeting went Grey Sheet, because it was Grey Sheet. It had the preamble, and the group purpose. This meeting has been founded and designed to discuss Grey Sheet abstinence, but it wasn't that. Eventually, I come to find that out. I was just like, this is not a Grey Sheet meeting, because I cherish this. And so when somebody tells me it's not, they're not doing what I'm doing, it's something that pops into my head to question. Well, if they can do it, why can't I? It goes back to the step one. And step one is, something I have to, go to constantly, because step one, it's all about that obsession of the mind and the spiritual aspect. For me, it wasn't like an arrogant self-centeredness. It was more of the self-centered fear, what's going to happen to me? Not having any kind of faith whatsoever. And eventually, I had enough clarity after putting the food on the scale for a number of days together to be able to join an AWOL and work that. And that was one of the best experiences I've ever had in my life. One of the year-long AWOLs where we go through the 12 and 12 and the big book and look at the keys and talk about the steps, and we share about it and we share each other's lives about it, and working on these inventory process. And the inventory process is not something to look at everything that I did bad. It's not about that. It is about looking at our assets along with our liabilities. And the liabilities are just something that we need to look at and see what spiritual principles that I can use in order to combat that spiritual malady part that makes me want to, act out in fear and self-centeredness and self-loathing and self-seeking and dishonesty and those things. And so looking at that, and then I think where the rubber meets the road is the 6th and 7th step. Those where I'm entirely ready to give up that defective character, and I'm going to ask my higher power to take it away from me. But until I'm entirely ready, just like the freaking food, until I meet utter defeat from that character defect, will I give it up? Because I'm not going to give it up unless it stops working. And even if it stops working, there's that illusion that it's still working. So I have to smash it in my head, that illusion that it's working, right? And then making those amends. I was able to make amends to my parents. I stole a lot of money from them, not only for drugs, but for food. I stole a lot of money for food. It's unbelievable. And I probably stole more money for food than I did for drugs. Yeah, that's probably it. I'll end with this and that, I was able to make amends to them and have a good relationship with both of them when they passed. And my mother passed away probably 2 years ago now. And I was there and I was abstinent. And same with my dad. I was there in the room when my mom passed. It was probably one of the most spiritual things I've ever been through, because it was just like, you can't describe it. And so I'll end with this and that. Basically what we do on a daily basis to turn our food over on a daily basis is the 3rd step. And we have to constantly make that commitment on a daily basis, that 3rd step, because it's not something we can rest on our laurels for. Constantly taking that 1st step every day. Take my will in my life. Guide me in my recovery, show me how to live. And with that, I close.